I think a lot of people get upset with, or maybe not even get upset, they get tired of quote unquote expository preaching because it is misrepresented and maybe it's never fully explained to them. So I think within expository preaching, there are two different types at least. And one would be the one that most people think of, and that is systematic exposition. Systematic exposition being the proper name for verse by verse. And so typically you've heard of chapter studies being kind of the model child for expository preaching. Well, I just want you to understand and take a sigh of relief. Is that right? Take a breath of relief and understand that all expository preaching does not have to be verse by verse. And a lot of times, verse by verse teaching that is camouflaged and labeled as expository preaching is not expository preaching at all. Okay? Just because you're going through the first 10 verses of Matthew 22 does not mean that you're explaining the text whatsoever. What happens a lot of times is that people will read a verse, and then they'll say whatever they want it to say and use a few similar buzzwords that were from the verse, making it sound as if they're preaching from the verse, but they're really not. That's what happens a lot of times. And I'm not trying to be overly critical here. Maybe my tone of voice sounds like I'm being overly critical. I'm just trying to express that this is what happens often, and I don't want you to walk away with a bad taste in your mouth of what expository preaching is, because maybe you've been living with that in your mouth for a while, and you just haven't been shown what good expository preaching is. Because there's good and bad of everything. And maybe you've just been exposed to bad. And I'd say a lot of times, that's what all that people hear is the bad and not the good on this particular topic. So besides systematic exposition, there's also selective exposition. And it took me a while to realize that this category even existed, really. But that's where you basically select sections of Scripture. Not necessarily, you don't have to stay within one chapter of the Bible. You don't have to stay within one verse of the Bible. You can select sections of Scripture as long as you're explaining the meaning of that Scripture in its context and you're relating them, well, they truly do all relate, okay? They have to all relate. They can't just randomly select Scripture, but you select Scriptures purposefully that all relate. You explain them in their context. They all have a common theme. Biblical theology is a big word used in academic circles that captures this. For example, the concept of the Davidic covenant runs the course of Scripture from 2 Samuel 7 onward and really hints of it before then. For example, God told Abraham that a king was going to come from him. I think he told it to Sarah and Rachel. So the idea of a king there is present from Genesis. I think chapter 17 it is maybe. And then you see more, the Balaam oracle in Numbers 23-ish talks about a king coming from the nation of Israel. And then finally you get the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7, given to David. One of his sons would rule on his throne and would have dominion and power and all that. Then Daniel brings it up in Daniel chapter 7 as well, in the Son of Man vision. And then you see Jesus coming along of the seed of David. Many people call him the Son of David. And then you see him reigning as king in Stephen's vision in Acts chapter 7, and it just keeps going on. You see, there's lots of Scripture there that teach the running theme of the Davidic covenant and Christ ruling as the Son of David. And if you could just take 2 Samuel 7 and explain the Davidic covenant and all of that, but it would be properly within your right and to the advantage of everyone present if you took these select passages that all relate to this common theme. You showed how they related to one another. You explained the passages, each one in their context as well. And through that, you have selective exposition, as I call it. Instead of you stay within 10 verses that run back to back to back, verse by verse. Both are or can be expository preaching. And also both can be improperly handled and quickly evolve into what is just topical potluck, you know? It can be mishandled very easily. And so you just have to sit back and listen to the preacher, the expositor as we're calling him, and just ask yourself, is he actually explaining the text in context? If he's not doing that at all, then I don't care what else is involved. He's not teaching expositorily. And then if he's teaching it in context, but the scriptures, like if he's doing selective exposition, where you select a lot of different scriptures that all relate, but so he's explaining the scriptures in context, but really the scriptures actually don't actually relate to one another, then he's failed. And if he does all that, but he doesn't apply it to the audience and to himself, then he's failed. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can go off board here. And you say that you support expository preaching, or you think it's really important, or it's a must, or you're doing it, but you're actually not.